Is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone. I'm Marcus Simpson. I'd like to welcome you today to the InPrint Industrial Inkjet webinar. We've got a great panel all sort of dialing in from the North American continent. So actually, Pamela, are you in Canada?
Yes, I am.
Okay, cool. I've got that right. So Pamela Lee from Excelitas dialing in from Canada. Mark Hanley is, I know it sounds English, but you're not actually, are you? You're American based. Where are you dialing in from, Mark?
In Boston, Marcus. We're in Boston.
You are in Boston.
Rainy Boston.
Okay, cool. And Peter Hessney, you're...
Good morning.
Good morning, afternoon. And where are you dialing in from? It's sounding like you're at an airport or something, or a railway station.
Yeah, Rochester, New York. Yeah.
Rochester, New York. Okay, cool. And Esteban, Marin, where are you dialing in from, Esteban? I think you could be the furthest from me because I'm in the a place called Red Hill, which is south of London. But where are you, Esteban? Where are you dialing in from?
Good morning, Marcus. The sun is barely rising here in LA, California.
Okay, cool. So you haven't actually gone to bed, yeah? So you just stayed up all the way through for this?
Possibly.
No answer. Fair enough. And we may have, because we when we were talking about some of the issues around this session in terms of whether Inkjet is crossing the chasm, or in fact whether it's stuck in a ravine, and we kind of reached a point where we discussed the issue of ink, and it's possible we'll have somebody joining us who represents the ink world, but I'm sure if he's online, he'll say something now. But anyway, what we're going to do is just go straight into this webinar, which will last around an hour. The inspiration really for this session is Moore's book, Crossing the Chasm, which I'll explain a bit about in a moment. We've already had sort of introductions: Mark Hanley, Esteban, Marin, Pamela Lee, and Peter Hessney. I'm going to give you a little bit of an intro and sort of frame the session itself, and then we're going to go into the survey that we did earlier this year. We do every year a survey, and this highlights some of the key issues and challenges for industrial inkjet, with particular reference to, like the new segment. So we know inkjet is doing very well in ceramics and graphics and so on, and textile, but we want to address the new markets, so and really focus on that. Obviously, Mark has a grip on the numbers, and I'm sure you'll relay some of that. And should it flow right, any of the panel, one or none of the panel, might present a little bit about their own businesses. But I'm just going to go straight in now to. We use this picture a lot, and it's just really a frame of reference for what we define industrial print to be. It's industrial print really is, we define as print as part of manufacturing. And with the discussion we're having, I think we can focus on these three areas perhaps, as well as functional, direct to shape, direct decorative laminates, flexible packaging. So it's printing that is part of manufacturing. This is a well-used chart that Moore based on Rogers' curve. The difference being that the introduction of new technology, he's suggesting that some innovations reach what he calls the early market, and the early market really is where the innovators and early adopters see the value of a new technology and are happy to invest in that. But actually, in order for the mainstream, or for a product or a new technology or innovation to go mainstream, it needs to leap a chasm, because that chasm really is the difference between the early adopters and the early majority. And I guess what we're suggesting with the title of this seminar is that Inkjet is being challenged by that very chasm. A little bit about early adopters. Early adopters are themselves, I guess, in many respects, a new technology's dream, because they're change agents themselves. They see the value of a new idea. They're dynamic people, so they want to use this technology to really get a jump on competition. So they see the competitive advantage of it. They don't see necessarily, first and foremost, the challenge or the risk associated with that. They actually expect radical discontinuity. So they see this new technology perhaps as replacing the existing technology. So there's quite a high tolerance for imperfection. So they're willing to work with the purveyors of this new technology, and they have tolerance, and they have patience, and they expect it to be a challenge. Not so. Actually, they're quite a distinct type of people, and they represent really what is the early market, not the mainstream market. So what we really need to do is with Inkjet is to jump that chasm to the what Moore defines as the early majority. He calls them pragmatists. They're open-minded, but they want evolution. So these are the next set I'm suggesting, and perhaps panelists can talk to can contribute their opinion about this. But they actually are the mainstream, but they don't want huge disruption. They want to minimize discontinuity with old ways. I think Inkjet here has quite a significant opportunity, because in my view, Inkjet isn't a revolutionary technology in the sense it's going to replace necessarily everything it comes into contact with, or every single market. Unfortunately, the early majorities are intolerant of imperfection. So anything that isn't quite right, they resist. And that's a challenge, and that's a big, I think, challenge for Inkjet. They also need, and this is another sticking point, I think, and I see this a lot at the moment, and we see this a lot in discussions we have and observations we make, is they need evidence from the wider market that the new technology works. Now, that evidence isn't good enough for them coming from the early adopter, because people in the early majority perceive the early adopter as crazy risk takers. They need to see evidence from people like them that the technology is working, that they're gaining advantage from that technology, it's proven, and the risk is therefore smaller. So it's quite a big challenge, I think, we can see opening up for industrial inkjet. Just a little bit here, introduction to the survey, really. These growth predictions, every single year we ask the market. Now, I have to be clear, the market, the people that tend to respond to this are the developing community, so they have a vested interest in growth. So that, therefore, is quite a confident and bullish indication of growth. But you can see from 2015 through to 2018, despite the fact all of these results are massively positive compared to commercial print or any other traditional marketplace, but you can see a little bit of a spike in 16, where the confidence was quite high, a little bit of a dip back in 2017, and this year we see a return to growth with the highest real sort of indication of 10% plus growth this year. So it's really bullish. It's like a return in some respects to confidence. And what I'm suggesting is I think Inkjet itself, for these industrial markets, has gone through and continues to go through a kind of hype cycle. So it's gone up through 2014 when we launched the show, 2015, quite a bit of growth we saw the show, that kind of sense to which Inkjet was transforming these new marketplaces. And I'm suggesting there was a lot of early market action, projects commissioned, perhaps reached a sort of peak of inflated expectations, and down to 2017, I sensed frustration that things weren't moving quite as quickly, perhaps, as they should. And I think we've talked, and I'm sure we'll mention again, that perhaps there's been, we've been to blame a little bit of expecting it to be quicker because of things like the ceramic example, what happened in that industry. So what I'm saying is there's been a bunch of growing pains, partly technological, partly commercial, really presented itself, which we're going to talk about in more detail as we go through this survey. But they're not insignificant, and the challenges are being posed towards Inkjet are not easy. It's taking longer perhaps than we would have anticipated. M&A is quite active too. That indicates a market that's forming quickly. some of the larger companies are perhaps not investing enough in innovation, but are more happy to acquire. And some of the smaller guys have the ideas, but not necessarily the deep pockets to take the products to market. So we've seen that. That's indicative of market. I believe now, though, in 2018, we're kind of moving towards through the trough of disillusionment upwards, where we get a more enlightened understanding of the possibilities of Inkjet, a better knowledge from end users, and advances, in the technology. Things have got better, more reliable, resolution's got greater, speeds increased, there's more standardized systems. All of these things are helping Inkjet solve problems in various new industries. So really what I see here is if you overlay that Gartner hype cycle with the kind of chasm or the bell curve, the star could be, and this is just my opinion, so I'm weigh in anybody on the panel, but it could be that it's kind of moving up to that point, but it's coming against the challenge. The next challenge is convincing the early majority. So that's really my introduction. And now I'm going to kind of open it up to the floor, to the panel, really, to sort of perhaps look at the first question that the survey's highlighted, and really to see where we are or where we believe these particular new markets. So that's functional, jet, direct to shape, decor, and packaging. The survey results of 115 people seem to indicate we're still in what they define to be fast early development. So I'm going to introduce Mark up here. Mark, would you say, I mean, you're involved with the survey and the report and that, would you say this is fairly reflective of where you view Inkjet to be in terms of the chasm? And
not quite how I view it, but I think the responses from the people you talk to are on to see it from their perspective. And if you're in the middle of any new market and it's growing for you, you're going to say it's fast early development. So, some people may have a wider vision of where it can go. Some people may not, and it's not a criticism. But look at it from 50,000 feet, which is what we have to do in our company. My own feeling is that the chasm isn't quite there. It depends what you mean by it. Look, everybody takes as their model the existing market, the analog print market, if you like. So if you take, let me take a concrete example. Take the decoratives market, take decorative laminates, for example. You know, we know that market exists, and a good part of it is print, and it's done by gravure, and it's, you know, rather a stodgy, old-fashioned, not very fast-growing market with huge regional variations. We have two separate approaches to that market with digital. We've got the big guys in the gravure area trying to develop huge single-pass inkjet machines, and that's begun. There's trials going on, beta sites, but hasn't really got commercial. On the other hand, and so they would definitely say they're before the chasm. On the other hand, you've got people actually in Europe, in Germany, where most of the gravure printing is done. You've got people in Europe there who've said, we can't wait for these guys to take all these years to develop the perfect massive inkjet machine. We're going to take flat UV technology, and we're going to take pre-formed rigid panels, furnishing, and we're going to print on the surface, and we're going to laminate on the top of that to protect it, and we're going to bypass the existing industry, and we're going to go straight to distributors and users, because being in the gravure world, they've had so little choice in the number of patents they can get and how often they can get it changed that we're going to bypass that. And this is really for them, they're not looking at a chasm, they're just looking at satisfying pent-up demand. And it's not massive yet, but you know, they've made real commercial progress on that, probably getting up to 100 million square meters printed that way. And this is a alternative, competitive answer to somebody else's approach. So I guess what I'm saying is, depends who you are, where you see the chasm. It's not one monolithic industry where everybody's going to try and do the same thing, and everybody's just going to try and replace the old industry with the new. That's not really how I think it happens.
okay, so really to summarize it, if we were focusing perhaps on one clear application, and you know, I have an opinion on decorative laminates is a good one, but equally direct to shape printing. I mean, that has an application in packaging, and why has that not gained more traction? Would anyone else? Go on.
Sorry, okay, I'm sorry.
No, go on, mate. No, you finish, and then I'll ask one of the other guys.
Quickly, on direct-to-shape, we just did a lot of end-user research in some of the early insertions into the market of GTS systems in North America this year. And, the technology is not yet at the point where it's proved itself capable of production. So that's the first thing. And it might be able to do that quicker or not so quickly. And we don't yet know. And it's not a small problem. But in that area, we've seen that sometimes the people who are already in the analog print world, who are doing the screen printing or the offset printing of cans, are actually some of the most difficult people to penetrate with digital technology and some of the most reluctant to adopt it. So again, I've seen, even in the DTS market, I've seen people going around the existing structures of the market and coming out with very small scale cylindrical printers, for example. And that's had an early success with difficulties, but that's a sort of a non-production approach. It's a quicker path to some kind of commercial footprint, whereas a production approach is a slower path. And I don't think either of those have reached a chasm yet. They're rousing interest all around.
So, following on from that, then, Peter, I know you're online. I don't want you to miss your plane, so I want to introduce you sort of first in terms of the rest of the panel. Now, generally speaking, what Mark's suggesting there is that he doesn't see the chasm as such, but it's just at a point where it's taking time because these markets are complex. Is that something you also see?
Yes, I think what Mark discussed earlier was very accurate aspect. I really think it applies by application, right? So you can take industrial inkjet and break it down from. And I think, Marcus, you've done this very well in other presentations you've done at different conferences. But the maturity of different ones like ceramics and that's already been done. Everybody was wondering in digital inkjet, industrial inkjet is, well, why hasn't things followed very similar to how quick the adoption and how it happened in ceramics?
Yeah, right.
And what you really break down to is, in that particular case, right, that was a perfect storm that kind of happened.
Yeah.
And then we're over in the area of functional printing, and functional printing for us, right, we wanted to go away from what I consider to be the standard flatbed UV wide format type of thing to, can you put down different functional materials using inkjet technology and put them on a variety of different plastics, metals, and glass, and do it at speed, production speeds. And so that's really where Sensor Films has been focusing its effort in that. And I would put the slides that you have up there is that we have several early adopters that have gone and done it. We had one example that was an appliance manufacturer that in fact implemented an inkjet line system for fascias, decorative fascias. And then after that, the competitors that they had said, my gosh, I really do have to, pursue this area and really start a project and activity on it. And so, part of this is people are seeing the advantages and the cost advantages of inkjet, and they're implementing it. So at least I think you're spot on with how you're looking at it.
And sorry, just to summarize, so the perfect storm with ceramics, frankly speaking, ceramics and inkjet is far easier, isn't it, than actually the kind of applications you're talking about. I mean, the technical difficulty is considerable with functional when compared to something like ceramics. Would you agree?
Yeah. So like, we've been doing nanoparticle conductive inks, right? And we've looked at close to 15 different materials in the market. And so you have to have the compatibility of that with the complexity of each, print head. And it's one thing to go and do it in a text fixture. It's another thing to go do that in a production environment and make tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of stuff reliably, over and over again. And that's really what's missing today, right? Is have people gotten ahead of the application using Inkjet, and have the ink providers and the equipment providers really gotten together to put a mature system out there that people can start see as commercially viable and has been tested, and that's what we haven't crossed yet in a lot of these areas.
Well, that moves me nicely on here to the next slide. If we can look at this, people were asked they couldn't multiple answer here. Okay, so look, ink chemistry consistently though, regardless of that, ink chemistry consistently in the past 5 surveys is the single most important component when developing industrial inkjet. And from what I hear from people is the biggest impediment they regard to progress is just simply not having the inks available. Is that Pamela? I'd like to invite you in on this point. So Pamela, do you see this? And explain a little about Excelitas and what you do, and whether you see this also as a big challenge for Inkjet.
Hi, Marcus. Thank you for having me, and thanks to everyone else for attending. So my thought on the ink chemistry and Excelitas has a numerous range of UV curing solutions. And for us, LED has been the solution that we've been promoting and that we've been working with materials providers to validate. And for us, I think it may differ from different areas, but for us with the UV LEDs, ink chemistry is certainly an area that is a challenge, predominantly because of what Peter mentioned, is that the compatibility with different materials, the process requirements, they all differ. And so while it may work in a lab or in a controlled environment, it's very different in production. So I would say that the availability of number of compatible inks is... Sorry,
Pamela, I'm finding it hard. I'm finding it hard to hear you, actually, to distinguish what it is you're saying. Are you talking into a phone, or have you got a headpiece that you could speak more clearly into the mouthpiece, or I'm just...
I do have a headpiece.
Is this better?
Oh, man.
Oh, much better. Much
wow.
better.
Okay. Oh, I apologize.
That's all right. Right. Yeah. So try and summarize what you said. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not
That's
sure
right.
how much of it you could hear, but
and I know you're suffering
mentioned...
from laryngitis as well, but I just thought, my goodness, it's really bad. But no, that's good. Carry on.
So I was mentioning that from our standpoint with UV LEDs and compatible inks, it's certainly an area that requires a lot of validation. And while the availability of these inks is a lot, it has improved significantly over the last few years. I think it's just the understanding and the users being aware of what the limitations are and knowing what's required for the substrates that they're working with, the process speeds that they need, as well as the various the production parameters that may differ than a lab or a test environment.
Yeah, so okay, that makes sense, yeah.
So I don't think that there's a limited amount of solutions available. I just think that it's the understanding and being able to leverage that and use that.
I don't know who that is in the background. Was that Andy? No. Sorry, have you finished there, Pamela?
Yes, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's just getting various noises. I mean, absolutely fine. So you're seeing that this is a challenge, but it's not the only challenge, is it? Clearly, in terms of curing ink and so on and so forth. Esteban, out in California, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Ah, good. Now, you, following on from what Pam was saying, because obviously has experience with the curing side of things, your experience base, I know, with heads, Inkjet heads and so on. So, to what extent do you, in your experience when you're developing a new technology, do you collaborate with ink makers? The thing that I kind of have observed is that engineering seems to step forward and then the ink seems to be behind. And is that just a lack of communication, or is it more complex than that? Why is that?
Marcus, in that sense, I wouldn't put that much pressure on the ink companies. I think they are definitely doing a lot of efforts to push the boundaries on what they can achieve. And it will be interesting to explore beyond just the question, which are the most important component when you're developing, and why, and the reason why they're naming it the most important component. Because in my opinion, yeah, definitely inks is a key factor, as it is any of the other components that involves building a functional and reliable industrial inkjet system. But the other ones are definitely in the same pace as the inks are. So in terms of the heads development, and I think that all the other head suppliers will agree, it's not an easy job to just put these systems together and match it to each one of the formulations and ideas that come out there. But I think there is a strong collaboration between ink vendors and head suppliers and lamp developers and so on in order to work a solution. Now, the problem that I see, and kind of wrapping up what you've been talking about and all the other panelists, is that there is not a strong community put together in an isolated application and 100% committed to develop that application. There are individual efforts. There are companies that are leading on that, which is obviously normal in an open market. But going back to what everybody mentions as the perfect storm, which is the ceramics, is that what could it be? It was not easier for them to develop the solution. It was just that they were secluded in this very tight community, and they were all committed to make this happen. In one sense or another, they were pioneers. There are companies out there in the ceramic application that started way a decade early than when the whole market exploded. But I think that in the moment of taking it in mainstream, there was a consensus among all the suppliers of components of these parts that they were committed to it, and they were the ones driving this change.
Can I add to that, because I just cannot resist coming in here, Esteban. You absolutely put your finger on the button. Where you've had this kind of informal community of people who work together, things go quicker. And having said that, it took 15 to 20 years for the ceramic guys to do it right. But Esteban's right. It was a cooperative community, and you wouldn't have had that community if they hadn't, right from the beginning, had an understanding of a strategic vision of what they wanted to do. The same thing has happened in textiles in Italy. And in many other markets, you don't see it so much. I wouldn't say I would really describe what's going on in DTS or decoratives in that same way. You absolutely put your finger on the button. That's what it's all about, getting across the chasm, Esteban.
Collaboration. So I have a few points that following on from that from an ink maker, Andy at Mexar, who may be listening and has had problems getting online, but in any case, he emailed me this. Very useful.
I'm online.
Oh,
I'm
well,
online, Marcus.
Well, I don't need to read it all out then. That very useful email that you must have written at warp speed. And you could say, and Andy wasn't planned to be on this, and he stepped in very, very late on, because I said, look, we really got chatting about ink. So you go ahead. What do you see as an ink maker? Because everyone seems to blame you, not you personally, of course, but inks in
Don't worry, as an ink maker, we're used to being the scapegoats on projects, so don't worry about that.
Good stuff.
No, I think what everyone said is absolutely key about the collaboration is really key. Going back a few years, what would often happen is the ink is sort of the last part that was put to the puzzle, and it would be integrating ink chemistry into existing machines which weren't necessarily built for the job. Whereas what we found developing inks is the best projects happen where there's a collaboration between machine manufacturers, end users, and the chemistry to try and fit everything together. there is a, I think with inkjet still being, I'd say, relatively new technology, there is still only a finite amount of resources of people that have the knowledge and are willing to look into these some of the key areas of industrial inkjet. And each of these niche, let's say it's a bit of an oxymoron, but large niche projects, they all take a lot of time and cost a lot of money, and that does slow things down with only a finite amount of people being able to work on these projects, and each project taking a long time and a lot of effort. But really, collaboration is the big key between the ink developers and integrators and head manufacturers, because ink is the sort of variable here. You don't tend to develop a new head for each application, a new print head, for example, but a new ink is required for each application. So ink is one of the key variables, I guess.
And on that front, then, developing a new ink, it's not easy either, is it? Right? I mean, it's chemistry. It's
no. It's. I mean, chemistry is difficult to predict. It's nicer to start from the chemistry point of view to get the chemistry right, and then think about hardware. But best case is to work together at the same time, so you can think about the chemistry and the engineering side by side, because each ink chemistry and the little tweaks in ink chemistry can have a big difference on what engineering is required.
Absolutely, and the collaboration thing. Is that a realistic? And I think ceramics was a perfect storm. I mean, the European communities were literally centered around two geographical areas, weren't they? So actually, it literally the people involved were in close proximity to one another. I mean, that doesn't really exist in any of these new markets, and I guess that has a role to play too, in terms of that. The other thing I thought, just finishing off on the ceramics thing, there was a clear economic reason to take inkjet, wasn't there? A very clear and compelling economic reason for taking inkjet on, and surely that is the most important argument for adoption, is when it's affecting or improving your bottom line. And is it clear with these new applications, or is it something that will become clearer over time? Would you agree with that? Surely the economic argument for adoption is the most important or the most powerful? Who would like to take that up? Mark?
I think that might be for Mark.
Yeah, Mark.
Well, I'll just throw in a comment. It's interesting what you said about the textile and the ceramics communities were geographically specific, and it gave a better chance to collaboration. That's true, but you could say that of decorative laminates. That's a German-based market, okay? And indeed, the situation I described of other suppliers going around the existing structures and getting ahead of them is also German. And so you look at that industry, and they're very good people in the gravure world, but they've let their market become a little bit moribund, in my respectful opinion, in that, there's probably tens of thousands of people who would like a high quality laminate if they thought they could get an interesting physical appearance out of it. And of course, with gravure, the runs are so long that it's just boring and samey. But if they thought they could do better, they could get more choice. The market would be, and many people think, I certainly think, and we've talked to users about this, the market would grow. But here we have the people who totally control the market. It's only a handful of companies. They've been aware of this for many years, and their approach has been a centralized approach, and get a huge, great big fixed array press running, which is a very difficult technological project, but it's not the only way to crack that egg. And in fact, it may be too much capacity too soon if they get it running. So I don't know. I look at that community and I say the geographical conditions are in place, the economic conditions are in place, and yet I have to look at that and say that's taking an awfully long time.
Yeah, it is. And moving on to the next one, it is clearly not just a technical challenge now. It's as much a commercial one, isn't it? And that convincing a conservative industry to try something new. I mean, that seems to be a very conservative industry. Is it also underscored with the fact, that gravure makes that application? I mean, it's not high value, is it? It arguably not as high value as ceramics.
But this is one of the confusions. The gravure people probably think that digital has to get very close to gravure, and it would diminish their value if it didn't. But actually, Inkjet can't do that. Certainly not just now, and they have a completely different color model from other industries. So the people who have the flatbed UVs, they don't really care about that. They just go in and they say, well, we've got what we've got. It works. We're going to see if people like the different patterns. And yes, they did. Sometimes people let the technical problems be far too big and bigger than they need to be to get a start in the market, to be honest.
Okay, thank you. Pamela, as you're online here, so you've mentioned before that you've seen similar patterns follow in other markets, particularly with the adoption of UV LED and so on. Do you see this as a technical challenge or a commercial one or both? What is the most respondents completely agree with this? Does that link in with what you've seen and what you understand?
It absolutely does. I think initially when a technology is introduced, it is most definitely a technical issue with validating that new process. But once you get beyond that, and once people and end users can see that it's been proven technically, I think it is absolutely a commercial challenge to get things moving in. And I think it has been mentioned by Esteban and others as well on the panel, but often the success of new technologies is very much dependent on the timing, the market understanding of it, and the readiness of the consumers to take that technology on. But even more importantly, it's the ecosystem as a whole supporting that the adoption of a new technology. So you may have elements and pieces of the puzzle in place, but unless the entire ecosystem is there and ready to help push that technology forward, it doesn't happen. And for us, from the UV side, we've had the luxury of seeing it from a small, like the spot curing, now into the larger area curing. And so we've gone through this exact same path before already with adhesive curing. So it was validating that technology from the get-go, and later on it was the adoption of it into various different technologies. So similar to industrial inkjet being adopted in ceramics, for us it began in small adhesive curing applications, and now it's expanded as the technology has matured, and also as the availability of materials is there, and the supporting infrastructure has all started to come together.
Yeah, and I agree. I'd like, going back to what you said, the timing is the kind of critical point, isn't it? Because there are many cases for innovations that have been available for years but haven't gained traction, not because the technology wasn't good enough, it's just the market wasn't ready for it. I mean, that is a fact. That could be an occurrence as well. So moving on. In terms of the single biggest challenge for growth, industrial inkjet, what comes out here is the conservative industry. I want to introduce Peter. Peter, you mentioned to me one of the things that sort of you believe is perhaps a problem or an opportunity is partly the conservative industry, but also you mentioned something about investment to me.
Well, if you look at it, right, the typical brain power of Inkjet relies in the guys in the $80 billion plus printing on paper world that's slightly declining, right? And many of those companies, while publicly traded, many of them have not been able to really predict for their investors exactly, how many units in industrial inkjet they could sell. They have some technology pieces, but I don't see them reinvesting in anywhere near to the degree you would think would happen in the market. And so the question is, absent of that, because those are the knowledge-based people, where else could the investment come from, right? You know, we've gone around the world and looked at, you know, who are the companies that are trying to drive this. And in the end, it really all goes back to the end user and the applications. You know, there's some very large OEMs making end product, and where we try to spend our time and effort is how are they making a specific part today, whether it's gravure, flexo, you know, screen printing, pad printing, how are they making it and what are they using that for? And really, how can Inkjet work for them? And will they make an investment, so to speak? Several of them that have been the early adopters and invested have wanted to do it through joint development agreements, some level of exclusivity for a period, because you know, they're looking at it as if I have to put the investment into it because there's a lack of investment out there, generally speaking, then, you know, I want to get something in return. And so, you know, those are the deals that we've put in place with several companies. You know, due to the fact of the lack of investment, at least in the areas of functional inkjet that we've been focused at. I can't speak for packaging and, you know, textiles and the other areas.
So from your perspective, really, if there was a bigger investment, some of the big names, it would instill confidence and, of course, revenue into an ecosystem that would therefore benefit from that and be able to put forward a case for investing. Yeah,
I mean, we've had a lot of success developing in the automotive segment, because the automotive guys, you know, the typical tier ones into the big end customers and that, you know, they're all 10, $20 billion companies and more, and every one of them looks at how I could use inkjet into my manufacturing processes to, you know, do things. And so that's where we've seen investment coming, is from the end OEMs that are large enough that they want to be the first driving it.
Yeah, absolutely. And with Inkjet then, in that basis, and some of the projects you talked about with Moore's early market, you get these people that see the value, that see the point of being first and having the competitive advantage. Surely that means that signs people in to projects that become quite secret. And would you agree that on the one hand, it's great to get these guys and working with them and so on, but it's quite limiting as well because they don't share anything? Is that a problem?
Well, I think it is, but like anything else, once things do become public after a period of time in some of the markets, right, is people find out, other competitors find out, and things happen. I think for now that's been part of the problem of it not crossing the chasm, but you can talk to the printhead manufacturers on how many printheads are selling and where they're going into many of the markets, and that's kind of indicative of where are the new applications that are starting to gain traction. And so I think there's ways to analyze that.
I think I'd just add that you asked about people doing secret, what we call closed loop development. That there's a lot of that, especially here in the United States, involving inkjet. And it's great that people are interested in putting resources in, but the problem with it is it's inefficient because it's too complex for one company to do it in most cases. It doesn't matter how big the company is. It's just we've been saying all along, everybody on the panel, I think, agrees that the technology that works made up of multiple parts of all equal validity and complexity. And if you try and do that as a company on your own, the record is those projects sometimes get a lot of money spent on them, but they tend to fail because it's not an open community. So this community issue, if one point came out of this webinar, it's the community issue that Esteban raised. If that isn't present for some of these complex new markets, that's going to take you, double and triple the time to get the market.
Okay, they're calling Peter for his aeroplane, I think. That in the background there. So looking at this slide here, we've moved on a slide. Which industrial sector is your business most active in? Now, this based upon the developing community. Now, looking here, obviously, direct-to-shape on the left, direct-to-shape packaging, direct-to-shape products, quite high. flexible packaging. I just wonder whether this resonates broadly with what the panel view is, where the developing sector is really active in at the moment. I think it kind of mirrors what I'd expect, and flexible packaging there quite high at 16%. If you add both direct to shape product and packaging together, that's clearly the biggest area at the moment. I've also got a theory that I think they're close to consumer behavior, aren't they? They're markets that are either influential, or they're having to respond to health and safety legislation or comply with certain things. So it's a sensitive market that is therefore going to be, and fast moving, therefore going to be quite keen on new technologies. And I think that's possibly indicative of why. Just flick, if we then forward or project this 2 years, then we'll see on the next slide, flexible packaging leaps up to nearly 25%. Corrugated also grows significantly, nearer 20%. And actually the direct to shape, and this is, I think, indicative of the fact that people, I think, believe that the developing work will be done by them for direct to shape, perhaps, and that the actual market traction should happen in the next couple of years. But clearly, there's a lot of investment in flexible packaging. Esteban, do you see that? Do you see Inkjet? I mean, flexible packaging obviously hasn't got a lot of Inkjet at all working within it. Do you see that the future is that a lot of people are investing a lot of time and money and hope in flexible packaging?
Well, obviously, the conversations orbitate around the idea of the flexible packaging being the next market to develop. But honestly, Marcus, I see the same amount of excitement, conversation, and activities in other areas.
Yeah.
Direct to shape, decor, laminates, corrugated market. They're all a lot of conversations and wishes to invest. But as Andy mentioned before, it's not a low cost one-step investment to push a market forward, and especially markets like flexible packaging that they have been doing this for many years. And now people have the expectations and what you were mentioning about the markets behaving almost like a consumer market, because they have the expectation of develop these and launch it in a record time, and in terms of of what the technology can do. But going back to the main point, it would all depend if the flexible packaging community and the whole industry, unites and put it together and push it forward. I mean, we've been talking about why some of the applications that are justified from an economic point of view, justified from a quality point of view, why they don't, start, why they don't develop. And a lot of it is because there is not a tight link. I think I went to a conference 2 weeks ago and for the corrugated printing, and there was an initial sense that there is an intent to do that in that kind of application, but it will be successful as much as everyone, including the end users, realize and join to push the effort forward. I don't think it's a one company, one solution, one secret project, as mostly happened here in America. It's a matter of the whole industry realizing, okay, this is the next step that we're gonna. And I don't mean it in a conscious sense, right? It doesn't mean that they're gonna sit around a table and decide it. I mean it in a point that, in general sense, and everyone involved in it believes on the project that they're investing and wants to share it along the whole industry.
Yeah, so it has to be that ecosystem again that's coming together. Flexible packaging is complex, isn't it? It's big. It's I hosted a panel at the IMI event recently around this kind of subject, and one of the panelists, the lady Montserrat, actually from Heidelberg, if you want to know, but she said as well as that, it's a big IT challenge as well, isn't it? These companies are structured around IT systems that are designed for analog. So to change that is huge. a huge disruption, particularly when it's not necessarily clear how the technology is going to complement or so on and so forth. So it's not an easy thing to do. Pamela, is there anything you'd like to add there? Flexible packaging and some of the packaging sectors in terms of curing, is that pose a big problem for Inkjet?
I think for flexible packaging, that is an area that that from UV side of the LED curing, we offered the advantage of having a low heat cure. So we are seeing a lot of interest there, particularly because of the ability to reach a wider range of substrates. But I would agree, though, that it's not necessarily just one sector that there's interest. It is a wide range that where there's interest, and there's equal excitement in each of them. So I can't say that it's necessarily skewed one way or another.
Okay, fine. Moving on to this side, because I know we've got Peter online here, and you mentioned earlier, Peter, this functional is regarded as the most difficult, technically challenging. Is it? So you really are at the cutting edge, pioneering Inkjet into these functional markets. Is this? I mean, I'm sure you'd agree with that answer.
Well, yeah, I can tell you that not spending enough time over in those other areas, I can only tell you is, yeah, I think this is, once again, who are the people that filled this out, right? This was generally speaking not end users.
No, more the developing community, yeah.
Yeah, this is the ecosystem. So, many of the people that are ink and printhead people and whatever, sure. I think they have a general understanding that the functional area is the most challenging and difficult. We personally believe that it offers a lot of, unique areas that you'll only compete with a few companies on, in any one application at times. And I think that's a lot better than trying to have a system go into 10 or 12 other people competing for the same thing. And so that's where we've chosen to spend our time. So.
Yeah, no, it makes, yeah, absolutely. And I guess partly it's the technical difficulty, isn't it? And I think we accept that, anything that's functional with a fluid isn't necessarily just decorative, it's actually performing a role. I mean, that has to have significant chemistry challenges. I don't know if Andy's still there.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Yeah. I mean, functional is just a big challenge, isn't it, for ink?
Yeah, I mean, with the constraints of Inkjet, any functionality that you put into the ink makes it more complex and more technically challenging. So I agree fully with that graph that the functional side of Inkjet is by far the most technically challenging, because you're putting difficult particles, products into an ink with your technical constraints. Packaging, in the middle, you've got more potentially health and safety issues, as well as the functionality of inks and the substrates and the vast array of substrates that you could be talking about in packaging. And decor would be, I think, the easiest from a technical point of view. So yeah, I agree with that.
There's difficulty on different levels here, Marcus. I mean, obviously, functional is so difficult because it involves material science. And if you get to organic, semiconductor, room temperature chemistries, I mean, you're right on the edge of material science. So, of course, that's difficult. But packaging has different difficulties. Packaging is an industry where the economics are severe, and the requirements are to make your digital print technology in some way compatible with very complex manufacturing processes, which, are not going to change for the benefit of digital print. So the difficulties that flexible packaging will throw up are not properly realized today. So this is a good snapshot of today. But if you really objectively looked at what you had to achieve, say, in printing films, very thin films, with what are currently proposed as aqueous inks, which is not what most of the analog industry does, I mean, you're actually looking at, a Mount Everest of potential difficulty. I'm sure it'll be resolved because the motivation's great. But this is a snapshot of today. I wouldn't necessarily say this is objectively true for the future.
So sort of addressing the key question here, is it industrial inkjet crossing the chasm? I'm not saying crossing, or is it stuck in a ravine? Is it kind of stuck and it can't dislodge itself and it might not get the traction? Do we have confidence that we think in these new markets, inkjet will play a mainstream role? Anybody like to answer that?
Yes.
All right, you can start. Go on then.
Oh,
that was it.
my answer.
All right, brilliant. Okay. Yes. Anybody else? Would you agree that inkjet is crossing the chasm, or is it stuck in a ravine? Is it at a point where actually maybe it won't cross in certain markets to become mainstream?
Well, the way I'd answer it is, we definitely think the answer is yes. And where we see it is we finally are seeing companies, the end users that want to implement it, tolerate the technical difficulties, and they continue to come back to us and pull us, and they're pulling us towards a solution that they need and they want for a reason. And so, at least for the areas that we focused at, we've seen the people, the end users with the money that want to implement it, coming and pulling us across that chasm.
Yeah, and that gives you the confidence. I mean, if the end users are kind of, keen on developing this, then is that because they're just committed to digitizing their manufacturing? They see the point of small batch production, flexible production. What I can see the drivers in the packaging market for inkjet, but in functional, what are the key advantages, Peter? What is it? Is it flexibility?
Well, I think the flexibility in the workflow process, of course, is key, right? The net, in the fact of doing, many different volume levels and changeovers and that a lot easier. But I think at the same time, they're looking at precision deposition. So when there's precision deposition requirements where you want uniformity or you're going over edges and different, the contoured surface layout, there's challenges with traditional type of manufacturing processes of spin coating, putting down different types of materials, pad printing and that they have low yields. And so in the end, you're competing against what I consider to be a traditional technology approach, and you're taking advantage of what digital deposition can deliver.
Yeah. Do you sort of open this? Do you see inkjet as a replacement technology though for these remaining markets that it hasn't really necessarily reached mainstream? Is it going to play a complementary role as opposed to a replacement role?
I think a complementary in some indications, right? So when I take a look, we target a lot of screen printing applications and multi-layers. So we're trying to do it more from an additive manufacturing, perspective, not a 3D, but I call it 2.5D production. That's really where we see stuff.
That's
What
good.
the heck is that, Peter? No, I like it. I know what you mean.
Yeah, that's cool. So, posing that, I want an answer from California. So Esteban, is industrial inkjet crossing the chasm, or is it stuck in a canyon or a ravine? What's your view? What's your answer?
I light a candle for that every morning, Marcus. No, it's definitely it. It all depends in each application. It would all depends how everyone realize that it's a definitely more collaborative job and a bigger endeavor to be put together. So it will not happen as one company flyby. It requires much more companies, especially here in America, to come on board and commit to this. And it will be in from different aspects. It could be as a complementary technology, as a hybrid technology combined with, or as a replacement technology. And that's where crossing that chasm will depend on these group effort. And I'm not talking about the traditional, already established digital markets. I'm talking about all the other markets that really need to establish themselves as digitalized applications.
Cool. Pamela, thank you for that. Esteban. Pamela, your final view?
I would have to agree with the majority of the panelists and saying that I think that we have crossed the chasm in many cases, but
Inkjet has,
again,
that's should give us all sort of confidence, really. It's not a new technology in the sense that it hasn't worked in other markets. It does work, right?
Absolutely, and I think it's further along that curve in some sectors than others, but as an aggregate, I'd say that it has crossed that chasm.
Good, pleased to hear that. And Andy, our ink representative there, is it?
Yeah, well,
crossing the chasm, or is it stuck in the
right? Well, I hope it's crossing. I'm backing it. No, I think it is. I think it's like I said earlier, things take time, and it takes a lot of time for these developments. In some markets, it's going to be a case of breaking down cultural, barriers and conservative markets, and some it's technical issues. But I certainly think it's going to, be crossing the chasm. It's not going to get stuck in many cases.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that. Well, it sounds like it is crossing the chasm. It's not stuck in a ravine. It's moving forward. I want to thank all of the panelists for joining me. I know there's always technical challenges when you're live, but I think you all did brilliantly and added lots of insight and value, and I appreciate your time and input. And thank you all for joining us. We have recorded this session, so there will be a copy available for download afterwards. So unless anybody has anything burning they want to finish on, I'm just going to conclude there, really, that Inkjet is crossing the chasm. And I guess on that note, we should all take note of forthcoming events where perhaps we will be able to continue this conversation and see some of the new evolutions and innovations in the market. So thanks again for your time, and have lovely weekends, and see you at our next event in Milan, 20th, 22nd November, InPrint 2018. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Marcus.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers, guys.